Shalom, shalom, lekulam. Torah Rabbi for joining me for the Parsha Hashavua. Representing the women's department, we will build a foundation and a frame for the Parsha study around the words of the Chief Rabbi, our weekly pamphlet that Chief Rabbi Pinchas sends out, and we want to give Rabbi Eitan all credit for his amazing limudim every week, so diligent. He also does a weekly parsha study. And so for the women's department, to make this a little unique, we will be basing the limud on the words of the Chief Rabbi. So we will just give maybe 2 more minutes for others to join, and I will be right back. All right, Baruch Hashem, Toda Rabbi, Shalom, Shalom, Reverend Miriam, Iyami, Iyami, Miriam, Toda Rabbi Fumba.
Shalom, shalom, Yami. Shavua tov.
Shavua Tov. So we will dive right in. We have a lot to cover, and we want to keep within a respectful time frame. So I will start to share my screen. We will be diving into some of the mysteries of Parshat Shemini. All right, let me know when you're able to see my screen and when you see the presentation full screen. Okay, are you all able to see the screen? I can't see the chat window, so you have to come
Yes,
off and
Sima,
mute.
yes. We can see.
Torah Rabbi,
I can see. I don't know that about this.
Baruch Hashem. So Shemini and the secret of the eighth day. When I think of Shemini, obviously this parsha is dealing with the eighth day of ordination for the priesthood, a day of initiation, a culmination of the work of rectification and purification that prepares the priesthood for the highest levels of union, Yehud, in order to bring down the great light of that installation as vessels, consecrating themselves as vessels through the 7 days of rectification, just as we know the 7 days of the week are the days of rectification. The days of Zerampin, the 6 days being rectified by reunification with Nukva, Malkut, the 7th day, the Shabbat. So when we transcend this process of Yikud through the 7 days rectification, the 8th day is a suspended reality, in a sense, a day beyond normal time-space continuum, an elevated day, just as the 7 kings, which also represent the 7 days that are rectified. The 7 kings died because they did not have that balance, that yikud of masculine and feminine, and thus the vessels were not properly prepared. And it is the 8th king, Hadar, who, with his wife Mehetavel, was able to embody and represent that divine yikud, that divine completion and union that then makes the 8th day of the 7 kings, the vessels were shattered. Thus, the 7 kings represent the Shevirat HaKelim. So we also think of Shemini Atzeret after Sukkot. Sukkot is often likened to the marriage ceremony, and even the seclusion in the sukkah is likened to the bride and the groom uniting under the chuppah. And through the days of Sukkot, it is considered metaphorically and allegorically as if the couple were, let's say, in their honeymoon phase. There are many who interpret this Chag in that way. And thus, Shemini Ateret brings us to, again, that fulfillment that culmination that is beyond normal space-time continuum, that glorified and elevated day that is a Carmelite, in a sense, a Gan Eden, a true Pardes in which all is united. Because in Pardes, in the orchard, in the Torah Aleph, all of them synonymous, we know that the unification is the transcendence of duality. And this is what it means to have the vessels properly prepared to effectively contain the Or Ein Sof. So as an overview, we know we will speak about Nadab and Avihu, the strange fire, ecstasy, and the necessity of creating proper vessels. The rectification through food, because this parsha also goes into the animals that are clean and unclean, kosher and unkosher. And the rectification of souls through Gilgulim, through the food. And transcending duality, again, to become, let's say, immortal, because death is in fact a separation from the limitlessness of Ein Sof. And anytime we have duality, there is separation, there is death, because you make a difference between, let's say, pure and impure, light and dark, front and back, masculine and feminine. And so in that limitlessness of the Torah Aleph, we have the infinite nature of Ein Sof that is beyond duality, polarity, and plurality, and the embodiment of all sacred union. So we start here. Vayomer Moshe ze hadavar asher tziva Adonai ta'asu weyera alechem kevod Adonai. So I wanted to put an emphasis on this pasuk in particular and the importance of why kavod Adonai is used here instead of Shekinah to indicate the divine presence. And we just have here this diagram. When I think of the number 8, the 8th day, of course, we also think of the infinity symbol. And again, infinity is the limitlessness of Ein Sof. When the vessel is properly rectified and strengthened and sweetened to contain the Or Ein Sof. And thus, even in this undulating cycling, as Gilgulim is very important in this parsha, as we will see, concerning Nadab and Abihu and Pinchas. But we see this infinite cycle, which represents this spiraling of the dynamic between Ima, Bina, and Nukva, Malkut. So in the women's department, we have spoken many times about the unique dynamic between the Bina, the Ima, as the mother, and Nukva as the wife, let's say, of Zeir Anpin, who takes on, let's say, a daughter role or a daughter-in-law role. And we know that the Mochin, the consciousness, the Chokmah Bina Wedat of Ima, Bina, that is given to Zeir Anpin as the crown, then also becomes the Chabad, the Mochin, that is given from Zeir Anpin to his wife, Nukva. And thus we talk a lot about how the daughter-in-law then, in a sense, becomes the mother in this beautiful cyclical spiral relationship and mirroring, typified in this infinity symbol, this figure 8. And we know that in this parsha, the kavod Adonai, the divine presence, that is the rectification of Malkut, is when she elevates to the state of Bina, Ima, Ila'a. So just to start out with a little reading from the Safaria translation, I like to look at a couple of different translations. So I put it on the screen here. I put two different translations on the screen because of the details that are very important. So on the 8th day, Moshe called Aharon and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aharon, take a calf of the herd for a purgation offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before Adonai. And this translation is a little bit more detailed. It was on the 8th day of the investiture. So that's important. The 8th day of initiation. We are looking at the priesthood through this initiatory lens. And we know among the Bantu Israelites, our Bantu peoples as a collective, the mystical nature of initiation has always been very important in our traditions and in our culture. It was on the 8th day of the investiture, the 1st of Nisan, the day of the erection of the Mishkan, that Moshe called to Aharon and to his sons and to the elders of Israel to impress upon them that Aharon and his sons entered into the high priesthood by divine command and not of their own initiative. And speak to the Israelites, saying, take a he-goat for a purgation offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before Adonai, and a grain offering with oil mixed in. For today, Adonai will appear to you. And again, in this other translation, I think the details are important as written here. And an ox and a ram for peace offerings to sacrifice before the Lord, and a meal offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you to repose his Shekinah in the work of your hands, for which reason these offerings are obligatory on this day. They brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moshe had commanded, and the whole community came forward and stood before Adonai. And Moshe said, this is the thing which the Lord commanded that you should do, so that there appear to you the glory of the Lord. So now we go into the words of the Chief Rabbi of Africa. According to the mysteries of our Nusach Afriki and the nobility of the culture of the Bantu Israelites. So Parshat Shemini, the mystery behind deeply spiritual souls. The Torah portion describes the inauguration of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, on the 8th day, known as Yom HaShemini, following 7 days of preparation. On this day, Aharon and his sons officially began their avodah, divine service. Aharon offers korbanot, sacrifices for himself and for the people, after which the Chavod Hashem, the divine glory, reveals itself to all of Israel. A heavenly fire descends to consume the offerings upon the Mizbeach, the altar, marking a moment of profound simcha, joy, and divine closeness. However, in the midst of this spiritual peak, the tragedy of Nadab and Abihu unfolds as they bring an Esh Zara, a foreign fire, an offering they had not received as a tzivui, commandment. In response, a fire emerges from before Hashem and consumes them, resulting in their immediate death. At this site, the Torah states, Vayidom Aharon. Aharon remained silent, expressing a total acceptance of the deen, the stern judgment, without protest. This episode highlights the extreme kedusha, the holiness of the Mishkan, and the absolute requirement for precision in the avodat Hashem, the service of God. The teaching of the Ari HaKadosh regarding Nadab and Abihu, as recorded in Sha'ar HaPesukim, Gate of Verses, and Sha'ar HaGilgulim, gate of reincarnations, is based on a metaphysical analysis of their spiritual shoresh, the root. The Ari explains that their souls stem from the Gevorot, the forces of severity of the world of Atzilut, emanation, representing the purest expression of the root of Cain. Technically, this soul originates from the Gevura of Abba, wisdom, as it clothes itself within Ima, understanding. Remember, Ima is Bina, constituting a spiritual fire of extreme intensity. Because of this shoresh, they possessed an intrinsic nature that pushed them toward a constant aliyah, ascension back to the source, in contrast to the root of Hevel, Abel, which is linked to chasadim, loving kindness, downward expansion. This eternal dynamic naturally drove them toward a fusion with the higher levels, even at the risk of severing their material anchoring. Hang on 1 minute. Let me just stop my share. I have to get resituated. I think someone else came in the room. Oh, Reverend Chauah. Toda Rabbi for joining. 1 moment, please.
I'm happy to. I'm in the street, but I'm listening.
Yes, Toda Rabbi. So glad you could make it. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my share screen, and I won't be able to see the Google window while I'm on the share screen, but I will come back and forth to check if there's any messages in the chat, or if anyone has any questions, you can come off of mute as well. That will help. Okay. Go back. Okay, this internal dynamic naturally drove them toward a fusion with the higher levels, even at the risk of severing their material anchoring. The absence of a nukva, a female vessel, constitutes one of the most fundamental structural points of the Ari system in Sha'ar HaGilulim, highlighting the fact that Nadab and Abihu were unmarried. That's very important, considering the rectification of Yesod, the necessity of the rectification of Yesod, and creating the vessel, the feminine nukva, for the divine transmission of that mohin, that or ein sof, that vital force through the yesod. Because they were unmarried and they did not have that balance, again, going back to the juxtaposition between the 7 kings who did not have wives and the 8th king, Hadar, and his wife, Mechetevel. The vessels are rectified when that union is sanctified. According to the metaphysical principle of the Partsuf, divine structure, face, a human being only achieves a state of completeness through the union of the Dukra, the male, which is light, and the Nukva, the female, the vessel. So we know that by no stretch of the imagination, we understand that masculinity tends to manifest or incarnate in a linearity. So just as we see emanation, we know that the principle of masculinity, beyond human or social character attributes, the fundamental principle of masculinity is that which gives, that which emanates. So we think of this as this linearity, the line that gives. We can think of even the kav of the Simsum, but that's another story from Dr. Tivona. But We know that light, a ray of light, is linearity. It is something that shoots forth. It is forward motion. It is something that is emanating, giving. And likewise, femininity, the basic principle of femininity is that which receives, a receptacle, a vessel. So just as women physically in incarnation, anatomically, are internal, the internal space, the circular, spiral, cyclical nature of femininity is the configuration of a vessel. In many cultures around the world, femininity is depicted as the chalice, the cup. Some may have even been familiar with the concept of the Holy Grail, as they call it. This is all the symbolic encoded language of femininity, the interiority of the vessel, something that receives. The word nukva itself literally means something that is penetrated, something that receives, something that contains, something that protects, even as it surrounds. So just like a treasure, when you deposit a treasure into a safe or a treasure box or even a bank deposit, we could think of the emanation, the idea of a deposit being made, being given, being dropped. And something that is sacred needs a divine vessel to contain and protect it. That is the nukva, the vessel that must receive, contain, protect, and even multiply the Or Ein Sof, the Mohim, the vital force from that Yesod transmission. By remaining single, Nadav and Abihu existed as lights without vessels, operating solely in a state of katnut, spiritual smallness or immaturity, because gadlut, spiritual greatness or fullness, can only reside where the male-female union is realized. In the absence of a nukva to anchor and stabilize the light from above within the lower worlds, the spiritual energy they drew down could only result in a forced perida, separation, thereby expelling the soul from their physical body. So this again goes back to the idea of Shevidat HaKelim, the vessels that shattered, the death of the seven kings, because they could not properly contain that light. The vessels shattered. The light was too great to be contained without the proper structure. So again, death is separation from that divine unity, transcending duality of the limitlessness of Ein Sof. The text relates that they perished Bechor Vatam Lifnei Hashem, as they approached before the Lord, a term the Ari decodes as an incursion into the Lifnei, the inner or innermost divine spheres, through a hitpaktut, extension of light of their consciousness toward the level of Ima Ila'ah, the supernal mother, the Bina of Atzilut, understanding. For a human soul to access such a degree of revelation while remaining bound to matter, it must imperatively be clothed in levushim, spiritual garments, generated by the meticulous fulfillment of the mitzvot, the commandments. By penetrating these dimensions without the protection of these levushim, the intensity of the light of Bina caused a radical perida, separation, severing the vital link between the nefesh, the lower level of the soul, animal vitality, and the neshama, the higher level of the soul in this dimension, the divine spark, which caused the immediate departure of the soul from the body, because the body could not. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. Someone said they have no audio on YouTube. Oh no. Can you all hear me?
Can Rabanit.
Oh, I just saw the comment on YouTube. They're saying it's no audio. Okay. I hope there's audio now. So, the immediate departure of the soul from the body, because the vessel was not properly prepared. The body remained in materiality, the denseness. And we learned in the rabbinical program in our exploration of Da'atu Tevuna, of the Ben Ish Chai, that which is closest to Ein Sof is light. Light in the sense of ephemerality, the lightness, the softness. If you think of gold, I always use the metaphor of gold. Toda Rabba Baruch Hashem. Okay, they are hearing on YouTube. Yay. Okay. So gold that is refined, the purest gold, is actually very light, very soft. Indeed, it is a powder that easily breaks apart. And we think of that process even of humility, because that which is refined through the process of humbling, humility, is that which is tried by fire. And we see fire is a huge part in this parsha. The manifestations of fire, the foreign fire, the strange fire, and the pure fire of the divine presence. That ecstatic state in which Nadav and Avihu were consumed. So we must remember they were not wicked. They were not sinful. They were tzaddikim. But the vessels were not properly prepared. And like gold being refined, there is no shape or form in that which is purest. There's a lightness of being. That which is closest to Ein Sof is light. That which is further away from Ein Sof is heavy, dense, compact, material. So the more material something or someone is, the further away they are from Ein Sof. And this could be materiality of the mind psychologically. You know how some people are not, they're just not very spiritually inclined. Their mind does not gravitate towards the light things, the high things, the pure things of life. They focus only on what is here and now, what is flesh, what is matter, whether it's money and going to work every day, the mundanities of this earth, this dense, compact, heavy existence. We tend to say that they're materialistic, don't we? Even in our everyday language. So our Torah confirms this. Our sages confirm this. Ben Ish Chai and Da'atu Tevuna confirms this. The more material something is, the further away it is from Ein Sof. And so because the vessels were not properly prepared through that rectification of Yesod, that refinement to create that lightness of being, that humbling, that lack of form, that lack of separation, caused the body as the vessel to shatter. It could not contain that light. And thus, they experienced death, which is separation. The Ari insists on the fact that their act was bli sivui, without having received the order. As it is stated, Asher lo tziva otam, which he had not commanded them, constituting a fundamental rupture in the system of divine flow. In Kabbalah, the tzivui, the ordinance, is not merely an instruction, but the structured channel, the kav, the line of transmission. I just mentioned that earlier. uh, the kav through which light descends safely during the process of hamshachah, the drawing down of light. This goes into the tzimtzum, the interplay between the halal, the space, the vacant space, the womb-like space, and the kav representing a yesod-like transmission of that Or Ein Sof that gave birth to the Sefirot. By acting on their own initiative, they provoked an aliyat mayin nugvin, man, an elevation of the feminine waters or awakening from below in an unguided manner, without a corresponding awakening from above. This wild elevation created a profound imbalance and a literal metaphysical short circuit, forcing open the upper channels from Zeirampin, the emotional configuration, towards Abba We'ima, wisdom and understanding, Okma We'bina. This resulted in a descent of light of such excessive intensity that their physical bodies, unprepared by the framework of a tzivui, could not contain it. The Ari explains in Sha'ar HaPesukim that the death of Nadav and Abihu was a case of mita bi neshika, death by a divine kiss, described as the emergence of two threads of fire from the Kodesh HaKodeshim, holiest of holies. This neshika, kiss, designates a state of fusion where the or penimi, the inner light of the soul, unites with the or makif, surrounding divine light, until it dissolves into it. Ordinarily, a masach, a screen, acts as a protective barrier, keeping the soul within the body. But under the intensity of this union, the masach was nullified, allowing the soul to be drawn toward the higher spheres. The Ari specifies that this combustion was entirely spiritual. Their bodies and garments remained intact, as only the metaphysical connection between the nefesh, the soul's vitality, and the guf, the body, was severed. Thus, this death was not a destruction, but a stage in the tikkun, the rectification of the root of Cain. Their souls would subsequently undergo processes of gilgul, reincarnation, and ibor, impregnation, notably by associating with the soul of Pinchas during his act of zeal against Zimri, the prince of the tribe of Shimon, in order to complete their rectification. Excuse me. Just 1 second. Okay, I'm back. All right, I am. I'm going to pause the presentation and we're going to go into a little reading from Chauah Hadassah on the reincarnations of Nadab and Abihu. Okay. So we have the chapter on the screen in the Hebrew, and just for time's sake, because there's still a good bit to cover, I'm just gonna go ahead straight to the English translation that I have. It says, "Know that all the souls and spirits and life forces that are in all created beings in this world, all of them are included and dependent upon Adam Harishon. For behold, Adam Harishon included all 5 levels mentioned above, called from below to above, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yekidah, the 5 levels of soul, which are drawn from the 5 Partsufim, the 10 Sefirot, which are called from above to below, Arik Ampin, Abba Enima, Ziad Ampin, and Nukva." And we remember, especially from our Chauah Hadassah study, which we will be resuming, by the way, Monday mornings at 7:30. But from Chauah Hadassah study, we remember the map of the Olamot and the 5 levels of soul corresponding to the 5 Olamot. Asiya, Yetzira, Beria, Atzilut, and Adam Kadmon. We know anywhere we see 4, there's always a hidden 5th. Just like the name Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, although we see 4 letters, which also correspond to the Partsufim, the Sefirot, the Olamot, we know the hidden 5th is the crown of the Yud. So the crown of the Yud is Adam Kadmon. The Yud is Atzilut. The He, Beria. The Vav, Yetzira. And the final He, Asiya. We know that this also corresponds to the Sefirot ascribed to the Partsufim. Arikampin being Keter, Adam Kadmon, the crown of the Yud. Abba and Ima, the Yud and the He, Chokmah and Bina. Zerampin being the Vav, Yetzira, is the 6 lower Sefirot, Chagat and Nahi. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And Nukva, the final He, is Malkut, Shekinah. Again, these correspond to the 5 levels of soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yekidah. And we will begin to explain the aspect of the Nefesh, and from it you will infer regarding the Ruach and Neshama. Know that the Nefesh of Adam Harishon is composed of 248 limbs and 365 sinews, and their total number is 613. Thus it is found that the human soul, Nefesh, is composed of 613 roots, the Sherashim. However, each and every limb of the 248 limbs and each and every sinew of the 365 sinews possesses one complete partsuf, containing within it all 613 limbs and sinews literally. Therefore, each limb or sinew among them is called one great and complete root. However, sometimes through sins and blemishes, it causes that these 613 great roots become divided and separated into up to 600,000 small roots, and they also are, wait a second, and these, excuse me, and these two are truly called roots, except that they are small and not like the original ones. For more than 600,000 small roots, they cannot divide into, for there is no reincarnation beyond 600,000, as mentioned in the Tikkunim, Tikkun 69. And similarly, each lemon, each sinu of Adam Harishon, which is called one great root as mentioned, is divided into 613 sparks of souls, as stated, and they are called great sparks, and all of them are one root. And sometimes through blemish, they too divide into 600,000 small sparks, such that they are 613 great roots and not fewer than this. But they can divide only up to the measure of 600,000 small roots and no more. And in this manner, within each of the 613 great roots, there are great sparks numbering 613 and not fewer. But they may further divide up into 600,000 small sparks and no more. However, beyond 613 and up to 600,000, they may divide into 10,000 and similarly up to 600,000, but no more. And know that all of this applies to the aspect of the nefesh. And similarly, there are those that divide up to 1,000 and some up to 2,000 and so on. This is in the aspect of the ruach and likewise in the aspect of neshama. And for the difference in this division, whether many or few, is according to the blemish and sins. And know that Cain and Abel, are the two shoulders of Adam Harishon. Cain on the left and Chava on the right. And this aspect of the shoulder is that joint and limb which connects the arm to the body. It is truly attached and connected to the body and inclines slightly toward the back of the body above. And since this is so, it follows that Cain and Chava, each of them, had their limbs divided into 600,000 small sparks. And all this was caused to them by their known sin. And this is the secret of what was said in Tikkun 69, that Moshe Rabbeinu was originally Chava. And his expansion reached 600,000, and his sparks reincarnate in every generation, in the secret of a generation goes and a generation comes. And understand this. And when Pinchas, I'm going to skip down a bit. Oh. The baby waking up. And when Pinchas was born, it is written, and Eleazar, son of Aharon, took for himself from the daughters of Putiel as a wife, and she bore him Pinchas. And our rabbis of blessed memory said, Putiel refers to Yosef, who refined himself against his inclination. And also to Yitro, who fattened calves for idolatry. And the secret of the matter is that Pinchas, at the time he was born, was composed of two sparks of souls. And this is the meaning of Putiel, an expression of drops. For he was from two drops of souls. One spark was from the root of the soul of Yosef Had Sadiq, and the second spark was from the root of the soul of Yitro. And in the aspect of these two souls, he is called Pinchas. And do not wonder how the spark of Yitro became mixed with the spark of Yosef. For you already know that Yosef corresponds to Yesod, where the drops of seed from all the Chesed and Gevurah are drawn and become mixed within it. Therefore, it is not surprising how the spark of Yitro's soul, which is from a different root, became mixed with the spark of Yosef's root. Thus it is found that Pinchas took a spark from the root of Yitro, which is from the aspect of the inner light, the Or Pinimi, of the Nefesh of Adam Harishon of Asilut. Remember, everything is in everything. So we have an Adam Harishon in every Olam. And we have the Partsufim of every Olam. Afterward, when Nadav and Avihu died in the act of the incense in which they sinned, and afterward occurred the matter of Pinchas, who killed Zimri. And he merited that the aspect of the souls of Nadav and Avihu entered into him, which were from the aspect of the surrounding light, or makif, of the nefesh of Adam from Atzilut. And this was caused by the fact that there was already within him a spark from the root of Yitro, which is from the inner light of the nefesh of Atzilut. And through this, the nefesh of Atzilut became complete in Pinchas, with both inner light and surrounding light. However, the inner light entered him in the secret of actual reincarnation at the time he was born. And the surrounding light entered only in the secret of Ibor, temporary soul impregnation, after he was born and grew. Just a little bit more, and we'll go back to the words of the Chief Rabbi. And since this distinction existed within him, therefore there was another matter in him, and it is that you must know that the soul which comes to a person at the time he is born in the secret of actual reincarnation, even though it may be composed and mixed from two sparks, as mentioned regarding Pinchas, that he had within him a spark from Yosef and a spark from Yitro, all of it is called one single soul. And it does not require another aspect to join them together. But a soul that comes in the secret of Ibor, impregnation, after a person is born, such as the souls of Nadab and Avihu that became impregnated within Pinchas, behold, it requires that another spark of a different new soul come together with it, meaning that this will be the first time it has come into the world, and it will not be old or reincarnated. And this new soul is what joins together the soul of Nadab and Avihu, which comes in the secret of Ibor, to be joined with the soul of Pinchas, which is of the aspect of actual reincarnation. Therefore, it was necessary that yet another new soul be impregnated within Pinchas, and this is the one called by the name Eliyahu HaTishbi, from the inhabitants of Gilead, and he is from the root of God, and he is a new soul, as mentioned. And it came now into him in order to bind and join together the soul of Nadab and Avihu with the soul of Pentecost himself, which had been within him in complete reincarnation from the day he was born. Okay. So what's also important about this is when we think about death in regards to, let's say, the average human being, the ordinary person, is because that light cannot remain in the body. There's either through sin or blemish, the vessel does not have the capacity because it is imbalanced. There's either too much light that the vessel can't contain or too little vitality. Remember, the Or Ein Sof, the light of Ein Sof, is vital force. The vital force. Some would call it Ashe, some would call it Chi. So this life force energy, when people die, when things die, it is because there's not enough of that spark. There's not enough charge, let's say. There's not enough battery. There's not enough power, not enough light. Or again, perhaps there's too much in an improperly prepared vessel. So some people have a great zeal and ambition for spirituality, especially the soul, the esoteric levels. But when the vessel is not properly prepared through initiatory purification rites, and most of all through marriage, then they tend to become consumed. I often think of, there was a film called The Ninth Gate, if anyone's seen it, with Johnny Depp. And The Ninth Gate is about this man who wanted to find this esoteric book of secrets, and he wanted to basically attain a godlike status through his spiritual seeking. And he wanted to do this ritual that would, I guess, elevate his soul. But again, his vessel was not properly prepared. And literally, in the film, he is consumed by fire. So I think that's interesting that they put that even in the secular media to show you that a zeal for esotericism or mysticism does not grant one access to that Or Ein Sof without that proper rectification of character, rectification of the vessel of the transmission of Yesod, and divine union. Because even in that film, strangely enough, that man was not married. So again, it's interesting how these little hints and secrets are portrayed even in secular media. So the union of that Or Penimi, that inner light, that inner container, that vessel, and that Or Makif, that surrounding light, that transcending and transformative fire, have to be harmonized for the new soul to merit that elevation. And this was where Nadab and Avihu erred. Again, Zadikim, not wicked. They weren't wicked men. They had a zeal and a passion, but the vessel was not prepared. And so that zeal was rectified through Pinchas and through Eliyahu. We see the zeal of his annihilation of Zimri. And by the way, that two-edged sword was the Shema. Something that Chief Rabbi Pentecost teaches us is that the sword that we speak of when we say the Kriyat Shema, the 60 Giborim that surround the bed of Shlomo HaMelech, holding the swords, these are the Shema. It's not a physical weapon. It's not physical violence. We don't conquer through physical violence. We transcend and elevate and refine and rectify through the Shema, which is union. Echad. Transcendence of duality, where there is no separation, no distinction, no delineation, no separation of one thing compared to another through duality, polarity, or plurality. And so one of the mysteries of Eliyahu Hanavi, why he did not die, is that he embodied the internal Yikud, the internal Zivug. He had mastered his character to such a degree that he transcended duality and was able to unify the masculine and feminine within himself. And thus he created a vessel in which his body did not have to die the way normal men die. And it brings to mind one of our ancestral phrases, those who know don't die like those who don't know. So his body was able to contain the light without shattering, without collapsing. And he became himself a vehicle of light. And his physicality was refined to function like a spiritual vessel itself. So this is what we mean when we refer to the so-called Kabbalists. You know, we don't really use these terms, but the Mekubalim, Mekabel, the receivers, the vessel. So in that refinement of humility, one becomes in that feminine position of receptivity of that divine light. So when one refines oneself to the highest degree, one becomes a vessel, a nukva. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Oh, shalom, shalom. I can't see the room when I'm in the share screen. Toda Rabbi Shalom, Rabbi Yitzchak. Toda Rabbi for joining.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom. Okay, go back to the presentation. All right. Understanding and helping highly spiritual souls according to the Bantu Israelites. In Bantu Israelite Congo cosmology, profound correspondences are established regarding the notions of force, balance, incarnation, and the return to the source, starting from the fundamental idea that all existence originates from Kalunga, the primordial cosmic boundary, which both separates and connects the visible world in Sekhe and the invisible world of ancestors and spiritual forces in Pemba. Every human being thus possesses a specific spiritual origin and energetic root determined by the forces from which they emanate. In this perspective, what Kabbalah calls forces of severity is likened in Congo terminology to a dominance of ingolo, intense force, raw power, as opposed to imbote, harmony, sweetness, balance. When a being is structured primarily by ngolo, they carry an intensity akin to fire and a tension towards elevation and power. However, if this is not balanced, it can become unstable. In the cosmology of the B'nai Congo, human life rests on a dynamic of constant balance between ascending towards the spiritual world in Pemba and anchoring within the visible incarnated world in Seke. This balance is represented by the Dikenga, the Congo cosmogram, which describes the complete cycle of existence following the sun's movement: birth, growth, maturity, decline, and finally the transition to ancestral status in Impemba. Every stage is necessary and serves a function within the cosmic order. Thus, the human being is not meant to simply ascend towards the spiritual, but to fully complete their journey in Inseke before returning to Impemba. When an individual seeks to access spiritual spheres too quickly without having moved through and integrated the stages of this cycle, they create a profound imbalance. In this view, someone who ascends too fast towards the spiritual world without completing their cycle in Nseke ruptures the harmony of the Dikenga, resulting in a break between the body and soul and a premature return to the invisible world. For the B'nai Israel, the universe relies on a strict complementarity between the masculine and feminine, the visible and invisible, and fire and water, forming an indispensable balance of vital forces. So what's important is that in many Bantu Israelite cultures, we have always kept the initiatory system refined through marriage. So there is no priesthood without marriage. Even in what people refer to as African traditional spirituality, the priests have to be married because this again creates the balance that refines the vessel to be able to contain that spirituality. To remain unmarried or uninvolved in a symbolic union is to be energetically incomplete, corresponding to a force without an anchor. Such a person is judged spiritually unstable and risks burning out or losing their connection to the physical body. This instability is heightened by the danger of contact with the sacred without preparation. For without the initiations performed by the Nganga, the spiritual guide or initiate, that serve as energetic protection, spiritual energy can overflow, leading to madness or death. This absence of ritual protection is equivalent to direct exposure to a force that is too high, an incursion without the spiritual garments necessary to mediate the power of the invisible world in Pemba. Furthermore, every spiritual action must imperatively be authorized, aligned, and ritualized, as the world order is maintained by the Bakulu, the ancestors, and invisible laws. Acting alone and without a framework creates a rupture in the cosmic order, generating a literal metaphysical short circuit. In this vision, death is never a destruction, but a return to Mpemba. And there are special cases where the soul is literally called by the spiritual world for an immediate fusion. However, if this call occurs too early, it marks an incomplete mission and an imbalance that the cycle of life must rectify. The ancestors may then return through the family lineage via a process of continuity and repair, allowing the soul that has not finished its work to return and rebalance its energies. In the Torah Aleph of the 10 tribes under the aegis of Yosef, a person inhabited by Ngolo, intense force, powerful spiritual fire, is not seen as at fault, but as someone charged with an energy that must be balanced, contained, and directed. The danger is not the force itself, but the lack of structure, anchoring, and regulation. All the wisdom of the B'nai Moshe thus consists of transforming this fire into useful... Oh, okay, yes. All the wisdom of the B'nai Moshe thus consists of transforming this fire into useful power without letting it consume the person. First, the focus is on anchoring within the world. In second, a person with strong Ngolo must absolutely be connected to matter, the body, and the daily rhythm. This is achieved through simple yet essential acts: working, walking barefoot on the earth, gardening, cooking, building, and serving the community. Contact with the earth and natural cycles stabilizes the energy and prevents it from ascending too quickly toward Impemba, the spiritual world. Ukashem. Let's see. Uh-oh, did I put... Without this anchoring, a person becomes light, and the connection between body and spirit can weaken. This highlights the importance of a structured sacred rhythm, such as a lunar-based cycle, that helps maintain alignment between the physical and spiritual dimensions. In the New South African tradition, strong emphasis is placed on balancing polarities, particularly through union. A person dominated by Ngolo, intense force, must develop or integrate a complementary dimension of Imbonte, harmony, gentleness. This often takes form through marriage or a balanced relationship, but also through cultivating inner qualities such as patience, listening, restraint, and refinement of character. The goal is to become a living vessel capable of containing the force rather than expressing it in a raw and unstructured way. This also highlights the importance of character refinement, nobility of the soul, and in certain strictly defined and regulated frameworks aligned with Torah law and tradition, the possibility of plural marriage as a means of structuring and stabilizing that energy. Another foundational pillar is initiatory guidance. In the Bantu Israelite worldview, no one engages or traverses powerful spiritual forces alone. One must be guided by an Nganga, an initiated spiritual guide, who channels, structures, and protects the individual. Rituals, boundaries, and stages of learning are not restrictions, but systems of energetic protection. They act as filters, allowing a person to receive spiritual force without being overwhelmed by it. There is also a strong emphasis on progressivity. One does not attempt to access the highest spiritual levels directly. The ascent towards spiritual realms must follow the rhythm of the Dikenga cycle of life. Moving too quickly is considered dangerous. True wisdom lies in growing step by step, strengthening the foundations before opening higher levels. Just one moment. All right. True wisdom lies in growing step by step, strengthening the foundations before opening higher levels. On an inner level, a person must learn mastery over their fire. This includes practices of restraint, speaking less, acting with intention, avoiding emotional excess, and not constantly seeking intense spiritual experiences. The Ngolo fire must be disciplined so that it becomes a useful light rather than a destructive blaze. Within Torah Aleph, the connection to the Bakulu ancestors is not symbolic, but functional and structuring. The ancestors exist in Impemba, the invisible realm, while remaining actively connected to the living in Nseke, the embodied world. For someone with strong Ngolo, this connection is essential, as the Bakulu act as regulators of power and guardians of balance. They provide channeling, ensuring that the individual's spiritual influx is directed and not chaotic. They act as filters, preventing overwhelming or misaligned forces from entering, and maintaining the person within the proper alignment connected to their lineage. They also provide identity anchoring. One of the dangers of intense spiritual power is disconnection from one's humanity, body, or identity. The relationship with the Bakulu constantly reminds the individual, you come from somewhere. You are part of a living chain. This awareness stabilizes the person and prevents the illusion of spiritual self-sufficiency, which often leads to imbalance. There's also the dimension of guidance. In the Bantu Israelite tradition, In the Bantu Israelite tradition, major spiritual decisions are not made without consulting the ancestors, whether through dreams, signs, deep intuition, or through an nganga. A person with strong ngolo must learn not to rely solely on inner impulse, but to verify alignment with the Bakulu, avoiding unauthorized actions that disrupt the invisible order. The Bakulu also act as guardians of rhythm. They prevent a person from moving too quickly. When spiritual intensity becomes excessive, they may slow processes down, close certain doors, or create situations that force a return to grounding. This is not obstruction, but protection. They maintain the individual within the proper movement of the Dikenga, preventing premature transition into Mpemba. There is also a deep requirement of humility. In the vision of the B'nai Moshe, power never originates solely from the individual. It flows through them, but belongs to a larger chain. Recognizing, honoring, and communicating with the Bakulu is an acknowledgement that one is carried and supported. Without this recognition, Ngolo turns into pride, and pride leads to imbalance and downfall. Practically, this connection is cultivated through simple but profound acts: speaking to the ancestors, remembering them, honoring their names, maintaining regular practices of connection, staying aligned with the values of the lineage, and avoiding actions that break the bond. It is not necessarily dramatic, but it is constant. Ultimately, the Bakulu function as invisible stabilizers, maintaining a person in a correct axis between Mpemba and Nseke, between ascent and embodiment. For someone with strong Ngolo, they prevent dispersion, burnout, or disconnection from the body, allowing the force to be integrated, carried, and transmitted, rather than becoming destructive. In summary, Bantu Israelite cosmology does not seek to suppress Ngolo, but to maintain it within a living balance, grounding in Nseke, measured openness to Mpemba, union of polarities, guidance through an Nganga, respect for the rhythm of the Dikenga, inner discipline, and constant connection to the Bakulu. Without this, the force overflows. With it, it becomes creative power. So we see here Nadab and Abihu consumed by the zeal that created the fire of rectification for the vessels that were unprepared. And again, we know that Pinchas, his zeal was the rectification as the reincarnation of Nadab and Abihu. And that double-edged sword with which he slew Zimri and Cosby was, in fact, the recitation of the Shema. This is what we must remember. Annihilating forces of imbalance, separation, duality, and egoic illusion is the purpose of the recitation of the Kriyat Shema. And through this recitation, as we invoke the Echad, the unity of Adonai, we know that we are invoking and embodying that unity within ourselves. Not only unity of masculine and feminine, light and dark, light and shadow, front and back, all aspects of ourself healthily integrated within the self, as well as that unity with all of humanity, all of creation, seeing no difference or no distinction. So, for the sake of time, I did want to just briefly mention, this Pasha also references or delineates the clean and unclean animals. And we know that the animal kingdom is Malkut, contained in Malkut, Sefira Malkut. So just as Malkut represents rulership, royalty, and kingdom that a king inhabits, it's no accident that, it is literally called the animal kingdom. And the clean and unclean animals represent the levels of souls and the merit of rectification. So in Sha'ar Hagigulim, Ari Hakadosh delineates the levels of mineral, vegetable, and animal souls that reincarnate to be rectified through the process of eating. And in ascending order. So mineral would be the lowest levels of souls that had to do great tikkun. The plant world are the next level up, and the animals are the next level up. And so someone may reincarnate into a mineral, a crystal, a rock, even salt. Someone's soul may reincarnate into plants, vegetables, fruits. Someone's soul may reincarnate into kosher or unkosher animals, depending on the level of tikkun. And often, even the act of shechita, the ritual slaughtering, is an act of chesed, not gevura. So we sometimes think of slaughtering as a violent act. But of course, especially with our specific laws and the training of the priests who are conferred the privilege to do shechita, ritual slaughtering, we know that there is great mercy, great chesed and kindness in the way the animal is slaughtered so that it feels no pain. And even that is a great merit to that soul. And that soul, through that animal, is, in a sense, grateful to even have the fortune to be slaughtered, especially in kosher ritual slaughtering, and even more so to then be eaten, especially at the Shabbat table. So even the eating of meat on Shabbat, this is the reason for that, to rectify those souls. And thank you all for your patience. I'm fighting a little cold. So Baruch Hashem, we know that the Limud Torah, the Esek Torah, the Torah study itself is Refuah Shalema. So the Torah study itself brings the healing. Baruch Hashem. So we know that it is the femininity of Malkut that is the vessel that contains these souls that are to be elevated and refined through this process, even to merit the fire of Gehinnom. Again, going back to that consuming fire. Gehinnom itself is not Gevura. It's not harsh punishment, as the Christian world would have us to think of hellfire and burning brimstone and everlasting pain and condemnation. Gehinnom is the refinement. Again, going back to the analogy of gold being refined by fire, purified to be light and ephemeral, closer to Ein Sof. But in Sha'ar Hagigulim, Ari Hakadosh, through Rabbi Chaim Vital, explains that there are some souls who have not even yet merited Gehinnom. So there's levels. So the reincarnation in mineral or plant or animal allows them then to ascend to Gehinnom, to be purified by that fire. And even the waste when we use the restroom, when we use the chamber, we know that also feeds the klipot. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a purpose. And so that rectification process, through being eaten, through being ritually slaughtered, first of all, and being sanctified on the Shabbat table, through being sanctified even through the brakot, the blessings that we say over the food on the Shabbat table, being eaten with kavanot. There's specific kavanot, especially in our Nusak Afriki, in our Siddur, we have specific kavanot just for eating. Eating is not simply for the pleasure of the senses, but it's a very serious kavanot for unification. Everything is l'shem yakud. Every action, every mitzvot is l'shem yakud kuchabriku ushikinte. Everything is for the unification of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which is Zer Anpin, which is Tiferet, which is Yetzirah, which is Vav, and his Shekinah, which is Nukva, which is Malkut, which is the final Hay. Everything is for their union, reunification, and rectification. That even the 7 days of the week and the Sefirot and the Olamot would be rectified. This is the purpose of the ritual sanctification of Shabbat and even the lunar cycles. So when we eat with that intention, the kosher animals, we are facilitating that yakud and even becoming one. And it's a mutual exchange of merit, a mutual exchange of light. Because even as we are helping those souls rectify, through that chesed, they are helping our souls rectify. So it's a mutual exchange and unification. Again, we have to be unified with all of creation. Yes. And we know that, again, the klipa crowns the kedusha. This is something that we discovered in our rabbinical program study, especially in Tikkunei Zohar, Talmud Yerushalmi, Avodah Zarah, Datu Tevuna. We cannot look at the klipa or the klipot as enemies. In Torah Aleph, there are no enemies. There are only vessels of rectification, even teachers. So the klipa are not here to destroy us. Neither are we here to destroy the klipa. We unify by transcending duality. And we know from Tikkunei Zohar that the Nachash and his wife, Samik Mem and Lamed Yud, we know that it was Samik Mem whom Yaakov Avinu wrestled. And, even that, we can't necessarily look at it as fighting in the sense of combat and division and destruction. We can look at it rather as a dance. I even remember there was a film. I was a film scholar. I went to Sarah Lawrence College, and so I studied film. And so things always come to my mind through certain films. And so Memoirs of a Geisha was, it used to be a film that I really enjoyed. And in the film, this geisha, we're talking about Japanese culture, she is discussing with this man who is watching a sumo wrestling fight. And, he's looking at her like, oh, what does this little girl know about sumo wrestling? And he's also a very high-level businessman as well. And so she tells him in so many words that sumo wrestling, and business are a kind of dance, because geisha actually means artist. And these geisha women are the consummate artists who embody the highest level of femininity according to their culture. Each culture has its own iconography of traditional femininity. So the geisha's role is to literally be an embodiment of the best quality of the ancestral culture of femininity. So what makes them so valuable to these high value men is that they remind them of the nobility of culture, because the geisha are not just pretty for the sake of vanity. And in fact, many of them are not even the most physically beautiful women, but it's the artistry of the traditional garments that they wear, the traditional dances and instruments that they play, the traditional songs. And so they represent a living memory of that ancestral culture. And so, as this artist, well trained in a variety of the traditional ancestral dances and songs, she, of course, views the analogy of sumo wrestling and even the mergers, the dynamic of businesses and corporations as they merge, as a dance. And so, likewise, when we think of Yaakov Avinu in this entanglement with Samik Mem, we can think of it as a dance. And this mirror, again, even this entanglement of this infinite symbol of this figure eight. And so it is Samik Mem who gives him the title Yisrael. And it's not just a name change, it is a conference, a crowning, an initiation, a conference of a level of soul that we call Yechidei Segula. So remember the levels of soul: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yekidah. Chaya and Yekidah are specific levels of soul that everyone does not attain. These are initiatory conferences of levels of soul that come through refinement, tikkun midot, humility, and unity. And to have the level of Yekidah is literally the level of Adam HaYisraeli, Yisrael. So when we talk about B'nai Yisrael, I'm B'nai Yisrael, we're talking about not genetics, not land, not an ancestral lineage. We're talking about a spiritual state of being. The children who have inherited the spiritual state of Israel, what it means to be Israel, to be crowned by the klipa, because we unify by transcending that duality. We understand that choshech is or, darkness is light. The or haganus is the realm of Torah Aleph. The darkness is Torah Aleph, because in the dark, everything is one. So, Baruch Hashem, I will stop the share. And for time's sake, because I'm also getting ready for the Nidali mood shortly, we will end there. Toda Rabah for your time, for your patience. Thank you for joining. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen. Amen.
Amen, amen.
Toda Rabah. Shalom,
Amen,
shalom.
amen.
Amen, amen.
Amen, amen, Hima. Toda Rabah.
Toda Rabah, Rabbi Yitzchak. Toda Rabah, Rabbanet Miriam. Toda Rabah, Rabbanet Chauah. And on the YouTube, Toda Rabah, Vital Empress. Toda Rabah, Yerida Bat Sarah. Toda Rabah for everyone who is joining, who has joined, who may not come up on the screen, and for everyone who will be watching the replay. It is a privilege and an honor to share this study with you. And thank you for sharing your time. Baruch Hashem. See you all next week.